All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Nicole Theodosiou from Union College, and as chair of the Professional Development and Education Committee, it is my biggest honor to introduce the winner of the Viktor Hamburger Prize. So the Viktor Hamburger Prize for Education recognizes individuals who have made outstanding and innovative contributions to teaching and learning at any educational level for any audience. And I'm thrilled to introduce this year's winner, Dr. Neil Shubin. Dr. Shubin is a Robert R. Bensley Distinguished Service Professor in the Department of Organismal Biology and Anatomy at the University of Chicago. So to quote from the many, many letters we received, Neil is an extraordinary interdisciplinary scientist whose seminal contributions have changed our understanding of the evolution of land vertebrates from their fish ancestors and has helped to found the new cutting-edge field of evolutionary developmental biology. Moreover, he's a master communicator whose writing has helped raise the level of scientific literacy, especially in the critical area of appreciation for the facts and the process of evolution. His book, Your Inner Fish, is a national bestseller, won the Phi Beta Kappa Award in Science, and was chosen by the National Academy of Sciences as the best book of the year. Tiktalik's discovery story is highly engaging and thrilling, showing his enthusiasm for paleontology and inspires young students to live ambitiously and think like scientists. Along with his books, the TV series entitled Your Inner Fish was awarded an Emmy, and all of his public efforts have changed how we recognize paleontology and how terrestrial animals emerge from aquatic environments. Neil thrillingly and successfully integrates his scientific discoveries and educational materials, disseminating the meaning and history of life to our society at large. His contributions, elevating the popular science knowledge of science, has garnered him the Distinguished Service Award of the National Association of Biology Teachers, the Friend of Darwin Award of the National Center for Science Education, and the National Academy of Science Award for Communication and Science in TV and Film. So finally, to quote from a colleague and friend of Neil's, which was my favorite quote, "Neil is as rare as the extraordinary fossils he has discovered." So, joining us from the Canadian Arctic, it's my honor to award the Viktor Hamburger Outstanding Education Prize to Dr. Neil Shubin.
Hello. I am so honored to be the recipient of the Viktor Hamburger Award. So delighted. I'm sorry I can't be with you today in person. I can be with you virtually. The situation's a little strange in the sense that I'm actually in the field at the moment. We're at a remote base in the Canadian Arctic. We actually leave via helicopter for our flight to camp in the Devonian Rocks here, probably this evening in a few hours. So we're prepping and getting everything ready. I lose internet. So I will not have internet for about a month, starting in a few hours. So I'm recording this before I leave. I just want to say I'm deeply honored to be recognized in this way, and it really makes me think about what's important in developmental biology that has brought me to this point. What's important in the field? What's important in the scientists I've worked with, and also what have been important events in my own life that have brought this to me. I should say that we are, in terms of scientific communication and scientific education, we're at a critical moment of our society. I mean, we've all seen this during COVID, is that there's a real disconnect between the need of our population to understand science, the way we evaluate hypotheses, the way we form hypotheses, the way we look at the world, evidence-based way of looking at the world, and the needs of society itself. That is, we are living in a deeply technological age, but we have a society that is often running at odds to science and the scientific enterprise. So we have this giant disconnect. How do we connect this? And for me, that has really come down to scientific communication. And I've been very fortunate, actually, to work in several fields, which I think lend themselves to scientific communication and education very importantly. And importantly, developmental biology is one of those. And I should say, I'm going to give you a little personal history in this, but I hope that the whole goal is really to talk about why I think education is so vital at this particular time, but also how I approach it. I came to developmental biology as a paleontologist as an undergrad, interested in understanding the history of life. So I was interested in trying to go around the world, kind of like I'm doing now, to find fossils that tell us about some of the great transitions in the history of life. And I went to graduate school pretty much exclusively to learn that methodology, that approach. But things changed in my first year for two reasons. The first is that's the year that that's right after, a couple years after Stephen Jay Gould published his Ontogeny and Phylogeny, which showed the importance of understanding heterochrony and how that may affect understanding paleontology. So that pulled me in a little bit. But the other was I took an amazing course in my first year of graduate school. It was a required course in development. And it absolutely blew my mind. I fell in love with touring patterns. I was enraptured by, I couldn't believe that if you just move tissue around in a limb bud that you can get extra digits. I couldn't believe that looking under a microscope, you can see great morphological transitions, every bit as big as the kind I was trying to go around the world to see, to learn as a paleontologist, but I'm seeing them under the microscope. So, I mean, the whole point of development is a tool to understand bodies and the relationship between different bodies of different species became very apparent in that class. And it really changed my life. And so I decided at that point that I have to add the developmental biology toolkit. But I was still, learning the paleontology, but blending both. Then about 2 years later, the Hawkes papers came out, Matthew Scott, Levine, and so forth. And I was blown away by Hawkes, not only because of what they told us about development, obviously, but because it showed a unity among animal forms, that we now had a toolkit really to understand diversity in a very powerful way. And I should say that in the decades since, those insights have just stayed with me, and they've propelled me as both a scientist and an educator, all the way through. And there have been certain key moments where my worldview changed so much that I've changed what I do. That is the course and thinking about ontogeny and phylogeny. I wanted to learn embryology. With Hawkes, I decided, well, I got to add something new to my toolkit, and that's this stuff, molecular biology, which I had been avoiding studiously to that point. And I realized I have to do that intensely, and on and on and on. And one of the big changers in my life happened in the mid 1990s. When Henry G. at Nature asked me to do a review on limb development and evolution. And I was thinking, golly, this would be kind of fun. Maybe I'll find somebody who knows a whole lot more about the development than I do. And that person is Cliff Tabin. So I called Cliff, and he's like, oh yeah, that's great. Let's do a paper. You do the paleo, I'll do the development. He said, but we'd be remiss if we didn't include all appendages. That is not just vertebrate appendages. What about invertebrates? And so that's how Sean Carroll came part of the project. And so Sean and Cliff came to visit me in Philadelphia, and we had like a 3-day confab where we thought through the paper. And I opened it with my sort of set approach as a paleontologist. I've been doing some developmental, obviously, at that point. In fact, my first paper is on mechanochemistry of glycosaminoglycans and the formation of cartilage condensations, but not molecular. And so I presented like the evolution of limbs. And Cliff, in his beautiful way, got up and said, kind of like everything you just said is wrong. Because I was like, I was basically saying that, limbs are all homologous, but they're not homologous. The appendages of invertebrates, like, flies, fly legs and wings and halteres are different. Well, Cliff spent the next 2 hours walking me through, BMP and DPP and all the homologs among flies and vertebrates and limbs and the different axes. And I remember thinking at that point, okay, my world is changing in a very big way. And that's kind of where we're thinking sort of like about homology and how, we have the morphological homologies that paleontologists and anatomists and comparative anatomists have been drawing for eons. But now we have this whole other toolkit that's showing us homology of the mechanisms that produce those structures over time, and that's actually very deeper. It's not only deeper, mechanistically, but it's also deeper in an evolutionary sense. That those mechanisms have an evolutionary history that is more ancient and often a little more complicated than that of the structures that they form, and that's where the concept of deep homology came about, and then. And that's sort of informed my approach to really understanding the tree of life is really hierarchically understanding not only the genes and the phenotypes, but also the mechanisms that correlate genes and phenotypes. And that's kind of where I've been in as a researcher for the last several decades. In my lab, I've been really fortunate to have just wonderful postdocs and graduate students think about everything from gene regulation and mechanics of cells and tissues to paleontology and embryology and various types of imaging. It's really been a wonderful ride, guided by so many of the people that I've been fortunate to work with. I should say, in terms of education, and just to close a little bit, because I don't have a lot of bandwidth to send this text, because we're actually, the base does not have the best internet. So I'm going to have to dial back the resolution a tad, is really the power of teaching developmental biology and what it does. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of public venues over the years, and whenever I talk about developmental biology, I always show an egg on one side and a body on the other and say that's development, going from a single cell to 26 trillion cell or whatever it is, human. And all the cells differentiated and packed in the right place, and how shape and form and pattern have emerged. And that's mind-blowing when you think of that connection. And when you think of how we teach it as developmental biologists and how we teach it, it's really, four-dimensional teaching. You're teaching, cells differentiating in space and time and pattern emerging in space and time. And having the tools we have nowadays, digital tools and others, to really think in 3 dimensions. It used to be, teaching with slices. Now we're seeing the videos of go inside and outside embryos. The power is just huge, and seeing this dynamism through time. I think it really changes how you think about pattern and mechanism and so forth. But there's something visceral. There's a visceral thrill to seeing development, I think, that, it's every bit as powerful as, when you pull a fossil out and show, here's a fish and with arms and legs. There's something as a visceral thrill to that as well, that can be an entree to really understanding deeply about mechanism, that opening students' minds to thinking about mechanisms and so forth. So that's been a real focus for me. And when I was thinking about communicating these things to a general audience, I was actually thinking of writing a textbook on evolutionary anatomy, evolutionary developmental anatomy. This is in the early 2000s. And I was looking around thinking, there are a lot of great textbooks. There's a lot of great papers. There's a lot of great academic writers out there. Maybe I could take these stories and tell them to a much broader audience. And I was thinking then, what if I did more of a general science book on these sorts of things rather than a textbook? And that's exactly what I did. And that became Inner Fish. And Your Inner Fish really was an effort to convey evolutionary developmental biology. That is the joy of actually doing the science, finding the fossils, studying the embryos, and thinking about history, but seeing all that history in the human body. That was the conceit of Inner Fish, is using our own bodies as a tool to understand the history of life and developmental biology and so forth. And really, that's kind of been the approach I've been using for the last several decades, both in my own classes, but also in the public education that I do. So it's been a real thrill, because I learn from the students, I learn from my postdocs, I learn from my college students, I learn from audiences speaking to general crowds, like when they ask me questions that at first I say, why are you asking me that question in my own head? But I learn from them because, they're coming at this material from very different perspectives, and having people with different perspectives approaching your own science, your own work, your own communication is a very powerful way to grow. And so just to close, growth has been a big part of this for me, through the people I've been fortunate to work with, through the students I've been fortunate to mentor in my lab, to my own mentors through time. It's just been, and the general public I've spoken to, it's just been a fabulous ride for me. And it's ongoing. We're leaving in a few hours to find more. Hopefully we'll find new creatures, which we'll be talking about in another couple of years. So again, I would love to have a slide where I list all the wonderful people I've had in my lab and my collaborators and so forth, but I don't have access to that, nor do I have access to a memory that can bring about all those. You know who you are. You know how special you are to me, because you all are indeed. And every one of you has made me who I am today, and I hope I've helped you along the way too. And so I thank the committee for the award, the Viktor Hamburger Award. I thank all of you for your attention. And fingers crossed, hopefully we'll find some cool fossils in a few days. Bye-bye.